All right, we are going to get started. Thank you all for coming. Happy to have you here. The plan for today is, God willing, to finish the second chapter. We'll see if that's a realistic goal, but that we should be able to finish the second chapter today. Um, in case anybody wants to catch up on anything or has missed anything or wants to review anything, I have just again put the link to our website on the chat, as I try to do every time. So that's available. And again, everyone should feel free to uh, send me a message through the chat or just call out. It's fine also. um, so I won't delay too much in getting started. Again, thank you all for coming. We are, as we spoke about last week, we're about halfway through a long a roller coaster that King Solomon is going through, trying to figure out exactly what role material possessions play in the search for happiness in this world. Again, that seems to be where he's focused on. And he took a pretty dark dive. That was where we kind of left off last week. We said, and we warned, that with his dark dive that he's taking in the middle of taking, he's going to be going down to come back up. So again, one of the main things that we're going to be focusing on in this book is that King Solomon is really trying to empower us instead of put us down, bring us down. So in doing that, even though he may take a short detour into what would seem a depressing state, he's really it's in the process of coming back up out of it. And that's where we kind of left off yesterday with probably his darkest point that he's mentioned, which is that he came to a point where he just hated life. Right? He says sanesi. He says that he uses a term saneti, sinah, meaning hatred. Right? So he says he came to a point where he was hating his own life for where he had brought himself. Again, this is in the process he had gone through and accumulated all the wealth and all the physical pleasures that he could possibly think of and that you could possibly think of, and gathered them all and found that he did a lot of work and really had very little to show for it, very little happiness to show for it, for all the work that he put in. And with that being the case, he got pretty depressed from that, or pretty down from that. And we said last week also that he takes a step back from happiness and starts to look at wisdom itself. And wisdom, again, that wisdom is the tool that he's using to assess happiness. And he says, where does wisdom even get me? And he brought two examples of where wisdom seems to have failed him or fails humanity, and that he has complaints against. The number one, we said that he was upset that wisdom cannot save a person from the ultimate demise. All right, there's nothing that wisdom can do to save a person from that. So in that case, you're going to be stuck with, so what's the big deal about being so wise? Right? Again, he says himself, right? We know that King Solomon is the wisest of all people in the history of the world. That being the case, then what has wisdom done for him if it cannot save him from that ultimate demise? And similarly, or related, on a really related note, he also says, if I'm going to accumulate so much with my wisdom, and I'm going to work so hard to accumulate wealth, wisdom, and all that sort of those sorts of things, how do I ensure that it's going to last beyond me? How do I ensure that, okay, so I can't save myself from my demise, but how do I ensure that what I have collected does stay on afterwards? And he says, essentially, there's really nothing that you can 100% do to make sure that you do that. Again, we mentioned at the very, very end last week that a lot of it ends up being what we call mazel, which is roughly translated as luck, right? But some people end up having an impact on the world that lasts forever, and some people get lost to the dustbin of history. So there's nothing that my wisdom can do to ensure as in make absolutely positive that my wisdom is going to last beyond my lifetime. So that was where he left off. We're going to see this week he has one more complaint about wisdom before he starts to rise out of it. And without any further ado, I'm going to jump to this screen share and we can all take a look at this together. Okay, so we are now over here, this is chapter 2, verse 20. Okay, again, chapter 2, verse 20, or Parak Beis Bet Pasuk Chaf. Okay, chapter 2, verse 20. And going after what he said last week, again, that he came to a point where he hated life, particularly because he was stuck with this issue that he can't ensure for any lasting legacy beyond his time here on this world. So he said, and he actually speaks that out in verse 19. He says, I don't know if the child I leave behind is going to be a wise person or a fool. So I might be leaving this legacy of all this wisdom and knowledge and everything. And who knows, the next person may just never bother to publish it, or never bother to follow through with it. And in fact, we know that King Solomon's own children were not quite on the level of that he himself was at. And by the next generation, there was the kingdom of Judah had already been split, or the kingdom of Israel had been split into two kingdoms. Okay, I'm gonna see if I'm gonna make the text just a little bigger. Okay, now it should hopefully be visible to everyone. Thank you for pointing that out. So again, we are here. This is verse 20.
That's
and
really
he says
good.
interesting wording that he uses over here. He says, Visaboti ani, and I have turned myself. Sovev means to turn on an axis typically. Okay, Visaboti ani, and I have turned myself, Liya'esh et libi, to give up hope for my heart. Al kol ha'amel sha'amalti tachat hashamesh, for all the hard work that I did under the sun. Again, a very interesting wording that he uses over here. He says, V'sabuti ani, I turned myself, liya'esh et libi, to give up hope, or to, what's the word I always prefer to use? Okay, whatever. The idea is to give up hope, to lose faith in my own heart. Al kol ha'amal sha'amalti tachat hashamesh, for all the hard work that I worked hard under the sun. Okay. It's an interesting idea over here that he uses this term v'saboti, not typically used in making a decision. We don't usually use that term when it comes to making a decision or changing an action necessarily. It means literally to turn or to spin. So for example, you may be familiar with the word sivivon. All right, sivivon is the Hebrew word for the dreidel. Right, so the dreidel, that's a Yiddish word. Dreidel is a toy that we play with on Hanukkah. So dreidel literally means spinner in Yiddish. And when it was translated into Hebrew, into modern Hebrew, they translated it as sivivon, all right, a spinner. So in this, that's the same shoresh, the same root over here of the samach bet. And there would actually be a second bet over there in the way that shorashim are broken down. So again, it means quite literally to spin on your axis, as opposed to going around something. Typically, it really means to spin in place. So you're saying I'm making a turn to do what? To give up hope for my heart. Which again, that's a very interesting thing. What he's saying is seemingly not that his hatred of life or the futility of it all has caused him to give up hope, but he actually seems to have made some sort of decision to give up hope, which could be a commentary of some sort. I don't want to get too deep into mental health necessarily. Obviously, it's a much broader subject, but it would seem to be just from the words over here that he's indicating that to give up hope on yourself would require a choice, right? I'm causing myself to turn in order to give up hope for my heart. Again, very interesting thought. I don't know what to do with that necessarily, but that is just food for thought, let's say, about why he has to make a conscious decision to give up hope, as opposed to just giving up hope, right? But he also points out over here that his loss of hope comes from all those things that he worked hard under the sun. Again, that's our material possessions. Whenever we have this term, tachat hashamesh, under the sun, so that's the material world. And he seems to be saying, all that work that I did in the material world, that's what's causing me to give up hope, to lose hope in myself. in my heart. Again, in my we've spoken about the heart as being the empirical study of something, the objective looking at some perception of something. So again, he's giving up hope over that. All the stuff in this world, all the material and physicality that's causing him to, or that's allowing him to cause himself to give up hope to a certain degree. So again, just food for thought. I'm not giving it I'm not saying one way or the other, but just food for thought that he requires a decision to give up hope. Okay. So once again, he's kind of settling us into this. All right, I'm really down. I'm really down with all these things. Down as in not feeling good about it. And so he continues. I'm going to move on to the next verse over here. And he says, this is an interesting verse over here. He says, Ki yesh adam, there is a man, there are some people, sha'amalo b'chachma uvdas uvchishron, that they work hard with wisdom and with knowledge and with kishron. Kishron is basically skill, expertise. They skillfully work. So some people work hard with wisdom, with knowledge, with skill. Adam shlo amal bo yitnenu chelko. And to the person who has not worked, his portion is given. Gamzeh hevel v'ra rabba. This also is hevel, our steam, our something that we can't grasp onto. It's difficult to grasp, and it's very bad. Okay, kind of a interesting term there. Just ra'a rabba, very bad. All right, I'm going to read this verse again. Ki yesh adam, there are people, there is a person, sha'amalo bechachma uvdat uvkishron, whose work is with wisdom and with knowledge and with skill. Ula adam shelo amal bo yitnenu chelko, but to the person who has not worked, their portion is given. Gamzeh hevel, this also is hevel, v'ra rabba, and very bad. Okay. And so this I'm understanding to be is his third complaint about wisdom. Okay, we've had complaint number one was that it cannot save you from death. Number two is that it cannot ensure a legacy beyond your years. And number three is that you can't ensure even your own reaping of the rewards in this world. Okay, so in other words, he's pointing out over here that you can have a person who works very hard, very skillfully, right? Has put in all the work, and somebody else gets to enjoy to reap the fruits of their labor. Okay, all right. And this we know. I mean, this historically has been the greatest complaint about any system of economics, since the dawn of time. How some people do all the hard work and have all the skill, and other people get to reap the rewards and reap the benefits of that. And that's also, he calls that very bad. All right, so that is both hevel, it is something that is fleeting or hard to grasp, and very bad. So this word kishron over here, you may recognize that shoresh over here, that chaf shin resh. There's three letters in the center. That's kosher. Okay, kosher literally means prepared. All right, when we say that food is kosher, that means that it's been prepared in some shape, some way, or shape or form. Right. So with meat, for example, in order for meat to be kosher, it has to be slaughtered properly, has to be soaked and salted, and all the other things that we do to meat. So that's a process of preparation. Interestingly, is in modern Hebrew, kosher is also means exercise. So it's something that you do to prepare your body, to work your body so that it's ready to do whatever else it needs to do. In this case, kishron, this is a common term that we'll use to refer to somebody who has skills, right? So somebody is a Baal Kishron, is a skillful person. That's the term that we use. So, or an expert, right? So again, we have over here somebody who can use their wisdom, their knowledge. We've discussed before the difference between wisdom and knowledge. Knowledge is just raw information, wisdom being more what you do with it. And Kishron is actual skill, which means the ability to prepare other things, the ability to move things from where they are right now and turn them into something else. So you have somebody who has all those abilities, yet somebody else who hasn't worked for it gets their portion. And he admits that is something that is hevel v'ra araba, right? Again, fleeting and very bad, okay? Again, I find it interesting just not to take any side on a political spectrum, but you'll find that the same complaint is thrown by both sides on the political spectrum, where people say, you have people who have worked hard to build their companies and their money gets taken from them to help the needy, and that's not fair. Okay, so in that sense, you're right. King Solomon agrees with you. He also seems to be agreeing in this verse to, a very dumbed down version of like a Marxist mentality of, you have the exploited workers who are working hard with all the wisdom and knowledge and skill, and again, their work is being enjoyed by the fat cats on top. So either way, he's admitting, I don't think King Solomon's taking a political position over here. I just think it's interesting that no matter which side of the spectrum you're on, in that sense, you have a friend here in King Solomon who's saying that when people work and somebody else gets the benefit, gets the reward, it is something that is fleeting and really very bad, right? Because that person suffers. So again, this is his third complaint about wisdom, is that it cannot even ensure it doesn't even ensure you having what you have in this world, right? Forget the legacy beyond, after a person has passed, but even while they're alive, not necessarily are they able to ensure that they are able to keep everything that they've worked hard to attain. Okay. In a similar way, there's a famous book called Duties of the Heart, or Chovot HaLevavot, written in the 11th century to 11th, 12th century. And he discusses at length, he gives the example of an alchemist, which obviously we know now is not a real thing, but at that time the people were under the impression that there was a way to turn other metals into precious metals, into gold, and he talks about gold and silver and all sorts of precious metals. And he points out that the alchemists, no matter how hard they work, cannot ensure, even if they're able to turn, lead into gold, it doesn't help if any sort of other things, if the economy falls apart and nobody wants gold, well, guess what? You can have all the gold in the world and it's not going to help you, right? So in that sense, a person can work very hard and not even ensure that they're going to be able to reap the rewards, reap the benefit of their hard work. So that's, again, his third complaint about wisdom. Okay. And with that, we are going to move on to verse 22. Just scrolling up a bit. Okay. And this, I believe, is now where he starts to talk about the solution, or this is where he begins to actually turn away. So now he's gotten down deep and down into the dark, and now he's going to start rising out of it. Okay. And he says, Ki mehovel adam. Literally, the word ki means because, but we're going to see that there's other ways to translate it. Ki, because, mehovel adam, what will be for a person, b'chol amalo, with all their work, uvrayon libo, and with the breaking of their heart, shuhu amel tachat hashamesh, that they have worked under the sun. Now, I'm going to read that again. Ki mehovel adam. But this time I'm actually going to change the word from ki, instead of being because, we're going to read it as but. All right. But what will be for the person, b'chol amalo, with all his work, uvarayon libo, and all the breaking of their heart, shu amel tachat hashamesh, that they work under the sun. And what I see over here is, again, this word ki. The Talmud actually recounts to us that the word ki is used in 4 different tenses. Typically, it means but, or sorry. Typically, it means because, but it can also mean that. It could mean rather, and it can mean but. Okay, Sorry, it can mean but, or it could mean or. Okay, so it's kind of a pretty versatile word. Typically, again, it typically means because, but here we see it being used as rather. So after all these complaints, he says, now I'm going to take one step back again. Right? That's his what he does is he throws out a bunch of questions and keeps on taking a step back and looking at it from a wider lens. And he says, but hold on a second. What will be for the person with all their work and their broken hearts that they worked under the sun? Meaning to say, if I'm going to let myself go directly into that, what we called yush before, when he said over here in verse 20, he said he's going to give up hope. Says, wait a second, if I'm going to give up hope on everything that I've accomplished in this world, what's going to be with all those accomplishments? What's going to be with all the heartbreak that I went through for those things? And really this verse has to be seen in context of the next verse, because the two of them work together. And again, we see that consistently throughout the book, is you'll have two verses with the same word starting them. They usually to be read together. Okay, and that's this verse 23. So I just want to read these two verses together.
You have that in the previous verse also, Ki yesh adam.
That's true. You are correct. He did do that in the verse before. I didn't notice that. So now that you mentioned that, I did not notice that. Okay, so maybe I have to think about how that would work through. Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. Actually, yeah, good point. But as it is, let's read these two verses together. Or let me read this second verse, verse 23, and then maybe we'll read both of the verses together. It says, Ki, but rather, kol yamav machovim, all of their days will be with sickness. V'chas inyano, and their matters will be with anger. Gam balayla lo shachav libo, and even at nighttime, their heart will not rest. Gam zeh hevel hu, that is hevel. That is also hevel, fleeting. So again, this sounds at first glance to be also in the theme of his depressing words, but I want to read this a little differently than the typical translation. Okay, what he's saying over here is, if I'm going to go and I'm going to give up hope on everything that I've accomplished, well, then I'm not going to enjoy anything. Then everything is going to be terrible for me. So in other words, I put all this work into gaining all these things, into accomplishing all these things. But if I don't allow myself to, if I'm unable to find any happiness from it at all, then I'm going to gain absolutely nothing. And that can't be, as he's going to point out in the coming verses. It can't be that it's all for absolutely nothing. All right, so again, to read it like this, Ki mehovel adam, what will be for this person, b'chol amalo, with all their hard work, uvarayon libo, and their broken hearts, shu amel tachat hashamesh, that they work under the sun, ki choyamav machovim, their entire days will be painful, v'chas inyano, and their matters, their ideas will be full of anger. Gam balayla lo shachav libo, and even at nighttime their heart will not rest. Gam zeh hevel hu. I think that's also hevel. I think that's also something that's fleeting. If a person spends their entire life and living in a way that they cannot, that they've given up hope on everything, and that they've given up, and they hate life, their lifestyle, they hate their life entirely, and they cannot even appreciate wisdom and cannot appreciate the material possessions, then they're going to really live a terrible life. Okay. Again, so what he's saying over here is actually three things he points out over here, is that their days will be filled with sickness, right? Their matters will be filled with anger. So first of all, will have a physical reaction, right? They'll have a physical reaction that they will physically get sick, and they'll have an interpersonal reaction that they won't be able to maintain relationships or manage their emotions, an emotional reaction, right? Anger will fill their matters, and after all is said and done, they won't even be able to rest from it at nighttime. So if a person lets themselves drip down into Yiyush. Okay, that's that word that we had earlier, that giving up hope, and lets themselves fall down into hatred of everything that's in their life. That is where he's saying that's where you have some real, a real terrible existence. Okay. All right. So again, that is going to be a terrible existence. And in reality, you're not even, so you did all this work to get all these things that you're not even going to enjoy. That is real hevel. Okay. So that being real hevel, there has to be a way. And again, he's already established before in previous verses that God put it here in this world for us to enjoy to a certain degree. So it's got to be, it's here, it's got to have a purpose. Right. And in fact, he also preempted us with saying that he is on the side of wisdom being good. He likes wisdom, even though he's questioning it over here. He does believe in wisdom. So with that being the case, it's here, it's got a purpose in this world. Wisdom, material possessions have a purpose. Wisdom guides our lives. So with that being the case, if you just allow it to take you down into the dumps, that is where he declares that is hevel. That itself is hevel, is something that is, again, we don't like to use the word futile. It's something that you're letting things slip out of your grasp, like steam. You're trying to grasp something that's not there. And that's a terrible existence, as he says. Sickness, anger, and you can't even rest at night, right? Meaning to say that even when you try to put things away and try not to deal with them, then you're going to be stuck with your brain, constantly working. You can't stop your brain from working, and that's not a way to live your life. Okay. So with that, he moves into verse 24 over here. Oh, sorry. And this is actually an interesting verse over here, because we have an agreement amongst the commentators that this verse is to be read with a inquisitive tone. Okay, we would call a tmiha. All right, meaning that it's to be read as a question or as a wonderment. Okay, if anybody is familiar with, if anybody studies the Gemara, there are a number of times where Rashi will tell you to read a statement with a questioning tone. And Rashi here also says the same thing. So here's how it's going to be read. Ein tov ba'adam sheyochal v'shasa. Is it not good for a person that they should eat and drink? V'hara et nafsho tov ba'amalo. And show themselves as being good with their work. Gam zora iti ani kim yad ha'elokim hi. This is something that I've seen comes from God. Okay, let me read that again. Ein tov ba'adam sheyochal v'shata. Is it not good for a person to eat and to drink? V'hara et nafsho tov ba'amalo, and to show themselves, to show their person as good with their work. Again, interesting sentence structure. Gam zora iti ani kim yad ha'elokim hi. I have seen that this comes from God. And again, that's one of his anchors that he's using over here. That he understands that material possessions came from God, that wisdom came from God. And so with that being the case, it can't be that it's not good for a person to at least involve themselves to some degree in that. All right?
I have a question.
Yes.
If you didn't invoke a wondering tone when you read this statement and read it instead as a declarative statement, what would it tell you?
Yeah. If you read it the other way without that, again, Rashi says to read it as the question, but if you read it the other way, it would be, Ein tov ba'adam sheyochal v'shata. It's not good for a person to eat and drink. V'hara nafsho tov ba'amalo, or to show themselves as being good with their work. Right? And Gam Zora iti ani, this also I see, kim yad ha'elokim hi, that this is, I don't know, I guess you would read it as some sort of punishment from God or a test from God. I have seen this as a test, or again, that's how I would have to read it. That it's some sort of uh, a much darker take, where obviously he's saying that that all the enjoying this world, that to enjoy this world in any sense or any form is not good. By reading in the inquisitive tone, he's saying as, is it not good for a person to do such a thing? Right? Of course, a person should be eating, should be drinking, and this actually is a very interesting point over here, which is kind of a concept which is becoming relevant or has become more in the mainstream recently, is that a person should connect with their work that they do, so that they should be proud of the work that they do. Right? This is this idea, hara et nafsho, to show yourself, to display yourself. That's the word I'm looking for. To display yourself as good with your work. Right? A person should be proud of the work that they do. Right? So again, he's stating over here that it is good. And again, he puts it as a question. Is it not good for a person to eat and to drink and to be proud of the work that they do? And he says that comes from God. So there has to be a purpose to it.
So it would seem to me that people who interpret this book as a dark commentary on human condition haven't read their Rashi.
Yes. That's how I would read it all. That's how I was stuck with the same kind of question. Because you're right. This is how Rashi puts it. And with that being the case, it's funny to not read it like that. Now, our own take on the book has veered away from Rashi's interpretation many times. So while Rashi is one commentary on the book, and we've kind of done another take on it. So we ourselves have gone not directly with Rashi's take on it. So I can understand not going with Rashi, particularly because he does throw in a lot from the sages, more what's the word? Parabolic. The sages take individual verses and they'll teach a lesson out of it commonly. And Rashi typically follows how the sages learn something, even though it doesn't actually fit in the text. Meaning they'll take something out of context and use that as a life lesson for us, which is perfectly reasonable to do and right to do if you're one of the sages. But for us, we're trying to give a sense of how the book reads top to bottom. And with doing that, we will ourselves sometimes veer from how Rashi explains the verses. So again, I can see there is room to take it one way or the other. Here happens to be Rashi is not the only one. Rashi and also the Mitsuda, who is one of the primary commentators on most of the writings and the prophets. He also says this is an inquisitive statement. How could it be that you're not supposed to eat and drink and be proud of the work that you do? Of course, you have to be proud of the work that you do and be and eat and drink. There is a place for it. Okay. So now, with that being said, he had all these problems with wisdom. He had all these problems with material possession. How do I make sure that I enjoy it? How do I make sure that I leave a lasting legacy? How do I face my ultimate demise when I know that wisdom and material possessions cannot do anything for me? And he's stuck with those questions. Those are big questions. And I think he really touches on an answer to them in the next two verses. And this verse 25 over here is actually a very short verse. And it's a very strange, kind of out there in the middle of nowhere. And he says, Ki mi yochal umi achush chutz mimeni. For, or because, or but, who will eat and who will feel besides for me? Which is a very strange statement to just put in the middle over here. But he says, who will eat and who will feel it besides for me? Okay, now I'm going to read that again. Ki mi yochal, because who will eat? Umi achush, and who will sense, who will feel? Achush is a sense, right? There are 5 chushim, 5 senses. So who will feel? Chutz mimeni, besides for me, or literally outside of me. Which is, again, a strange statement to put over here. But
Seems
I
like,
think,
it seems to me like chutz is the key word in this whole sentence.
okay, what do you mean?
Well, it's the only one that kind of feels ambiguous to me.
Okay. So can you
Maybe
explain?
because my Hebrew is not so strong.
Okay.
I'm not familiar with the word chutz, but everything in that sentence makes sense except for that word.
Okay. So chutz typically literally means outside, right? When you say that go outside, it means you say you go to the chutz, all right? Literally, it's the shoresh of the word would be chatzi, which would mean half or a divider. So chutz is something that's beyond the divide. So there's toch, which is the inside, and there's chutz, which is outside, right? Out beyond the border. In this case, in many cases, the word chutz means besides. So besides for me, who else does this? And that is how he's using it over here. So chutz over here again means besides for me. So chutz means besides for me, who eats and who feels. Okay, that's the what the word itself means. I would like to offer over here that I think he's starting to touch on an answer to his questions, which is that he's spending a lot of time. His questions about wisdom spend a lot of time thinking about the future, thinking about other people, things that are outside of your hands to accomplish. Okay, you cannot do anything about certain issues. A person cannot do anything about their ultimate demise. A person cannot do anything about their legacy beyond this world. A person cannot do anything about necessarily what's going to be done with their property even while they are alive. It can be taken away from them at a moment's notice. So there's very little that you actually have control over. So when he's looking at all of the material possessions that he's got in front of him, he says to himself, now hold on a second. Who is going to enjoy this? Who's going to sense it? Who's going to feel it? Who's going to taste it besides for me? Really, meaning who else, what can I affect that's in my control is really just eating it and sensing it and feeling it and touching it. So in a certain sense, he's saying, and I think he's starting to again, answer the question is, if your sense of wisdom or your relationship to wisdom and your relationship to material possessions is all about power and control, well, there's actually very little that you have power and control over. If it's about the items themselves, it's about enjoying your time right now, that is something that you can control. So when he is talking about giving up hope, when he's talking about hating life and hating everything, that's when he's still trying to control things, that he's trying to grasp things that he can't reach. He's trying to grasp at Hevel, at steam, something that you can't grasp onto. But now he's turning and he's saying, all these things in front of me, everything in this world that I recognize has to be here for a purpose, there's only one thing that I can't control, and that's the fact that I can enjoy it right now. I can't control what's going to be done with it later. Chutz mimeni, as he says, right? As Jacob was pointing out, right? Chutz mimeni means something that's beyond me. I can't control those things, but I can control the things that I can control, and those are things that I can enjoy. And that's actually how he finishes off the chapter here with verse number 26. Okay, verse number 26, where he says, Kila Adam Shetov Lefanav, for the person who is good before him in this case being, according to many of the commentaries, the him is God. Okay, so for the person who is good before God, Natan Chachma Vadat V'Simcha, is given wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. V'lachoteh, but to the sinner, Natan Inyan, is given this concept, Le'esof, to gather, V'lichnos, to bring in, Latet Letov Lifnei Ha'elokim, and to give good before God. Again, strange sentence structure. Gamzeh Hevel Rut Ruach. That is fleeting and spirit breaking. So he kind of breaks this verse into two parts. Let's break this verse into two parts. He says, Kila Adam Shetov Lefanav, somebody who acts good, who is good before God. Now we really have not spent any time talking about what's a good person. And I believe that's going to be more relegated to the second half of the book. So it's going to be a while before we get to what is a good person. In fact, there's going to be many verses starting with the word tov la'adam. It's good for a person to do such and such. So we'll get there when we get there. But for a person who does do good with their life, that person is actually given wisdom and knowledge, but also happiness. Okay? So again, somebody who knows how to, who does the good stuff with what they are able to do, with what they have control over, that person will find wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. But the chotet, the sinner, who again, we really haven't discussed sinning yet in this book. But for the sinner, they're just going to be stuck in this constant trying to gather things, trying to bring things in, lasof v'lichnos, to gather and to bring in. And this is interesting that he says, latet latov lifnei elokim, to then give to the ones who are good before God. Right? So the sinner is going to be gathering in, but it's not even going to be for their own purposes. They're going to end up giving it away to the ones who are good before God. Again, we're not going to declare yet what is good and what is a sinner at this point. But the point is that there are people who will recognize that they have control over certain things, how they behave, how they act, what they do with what they have. So those people will be given wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. They will find happiness, as opposed to the sinner. Okay, that's the person who tries to control and gather and bring in the things that they're not able to do. Those person's items and happiness will get spread out amongst the good people. Okay, again, I really want to emphasize the point that we're not stating yet what is good and bad. I just want to, right? The obvious assumption is that we're just talking about, somebody who does the mitzvot or somebody who doesn't do the mitzvot. I don't want to pass that judgment yet, because he's going to discuss it a lot at length later in the book. But what he does say is that somebody who does good with what they have, somebody who works on what they have control over and doesn't try to act to control those things that they don't have control over, that person is going to have a good time and actually find simcha, is going to find happiness. As opposed to the sinner, that person is going to be stuck in this hamster wheel of gathering and losing. And that is, once again, hevel erut ruach, that is fleeting and spirit breaking. Okay, and with that we conclude the second chapter of Kohelet, and the next chapter. I'm sorry.
A quick question. So this zeh, gam zeh hevel, refers to the accumulations of the sinner. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so the chapter 3 is going to start with a very well-known concept of the different times, the times of the season, if you will. The Birds made this very famous with their for everything turn. So that's going to be chapter 3. We're going to start with that. So for right now, that's it for chapter 2. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We'll pick up next week, God willing, and I can't wait to see you all back then, or then.